Hello everyone, this is Singh 𝐂𝐭 and today we will be focusing on the chapter 2 of designing data intensive applications. We already covered chapter 1, so you can go watch that video if you haven't already. So the chapter 2, what we will be discussing data models and query languages. So if you see around chapter overview, right, what it means is how you are structuring your data, right? You have some kind of data, you have some bunch of data in your file. Let's say this is your file and you have a lot of data inside it. Now how you are actually modeling it, right? How you can read from it. So you will specify some data model in it that's how the data is stored there. Okay, so and what is the query language? When we say query language, how you are querying the data, you want to read the data which is placed inside a file or inside a database, so you will need some kind of logic, right? You need some kind of code. So there is a query language specified associated to each and every database which you can use to query the database which you stored. Okay, so earlier you stored the data, then you can read that data or update that data or delete that query. Any CRUD operations you can perform using query languages. So we will give like we will also have a short discussion around that as well. So if we talk about Uber level, right? Uber level, there will be you might already be aware that there are at the top, and there are like more kind of databases, but at the top you will think of that there is one SQL database and that there is no SQL database. ठीक है, एक SQL वाला, एक जो बिना SQL है. ठीक है, तो what is SQL? SQL is your basically a relational data model. ठीक है, so our discussions will be focused around relational data model and then non-relational data model. So if we talk about relational model, right, what does it mean specifically? So it means there is a relations associated in a data. Okay, there is lot of data. Say this is your data chunk 1 D1, this is your data chunk 2 D2. So there is some kind of relations. So if there are some relations that is existing inside the data, the record which you have, then you prefer to use relational database model where you can significantly specify these relations, specifically specify these relations, so that it's easier to retrieve the data and easier to store that data. ठीक है, एक बार मतलब अच्छे से दिखना चाहिए कि हाँ इससे रिलेशन ये, इससे रिलेशन ये. ठीक है, all those details. And what is NoSQL? Like why we will move to NoSQL? So there are certain reasons associated to it. Okay, so I skipped some very basic details. We already have video created and comparison of SQL and NoSQL. You can go watch that out as well. We will be also discussing all those things here as well. So why you will prefer NoSQL? Okay, so if we go to SQL, right? SQL was earlier introduced, I think, around 1980s or 1970s, I think. Not sure of the year, but it was like a predecessor of the NoSQL databases. NoSQL databases were introduced later in 2000, like after 2005 and 2010 and so. ठीक है, so there were some reasons, right? समझ रहे हो बात कि एक चीज़ काम नहीं कर रही, अभी हम दूसरी चीज़ पे आना है तो उसका कोई रीज़न होगा. ऐसे तो नहीं है कि ये काम फालतू है, ये पुरानी होगी तो हम नहीं ले. देयर आर सर्टेन रीजंस एसोसिएटेड टू इट दैट आई वांट समथिंग न्यू बिकॉज द पुराना वाला थिंग इज नॉट सॉल्विंग माय यूज केस. Okay, so what are those reasons? More scalability as compared to SQL database. So if you think of SQL databases, right, they are generally on a single instance. Now the data can increase. If we talk about, let's say, some social media website, Facebook, so the number of users, as the number of users are increasing, the data will be increased, the data size will be huge. मतलब इतना बड़ा, इतना आ नहीं रहा, कैमरे में नहीं आ रहा. ठीक है, तो the data size can be huge, so it will be a challenging problem to solve. That if your solution scales, will your database solution will be able to handle that much of data or not? Can it do it? Open source instead of paid software, actually this is kind of wrong. We should remove it. Okay, so like in both the SQL and NoSQL instances, there are open source solution and as well as there are paid software, so you can, this is not a comparison factor. Query operations that are not SQL supported by SQL. So as I said, right, there are some scenarios where we need enhanced kind of querying capabilities that might not be supported by SQL. So either you introduce some kind of data or enhanced version of SQL itself which support those kind of queries, or like store that data in that kind of format, or we introduce a new database. Here we have NoSQL database which like if you go into specific SQL databases, right, or if you go into specific NoSQL databases as well, जैसे Cassandra कोई और use case solve कर रहा है, like it is focusing on something else, DynamoDB is focusing something else, SkylarDB is focusing on something else. So if you talk about NoSQL, or if you're focusing on SQL as well, MySQL, Aurora, Postgres, there will be something different in each one of them. Okay, so to specifically focus on each use case, you have to think around that. So these are some kind of reasons, why NoSQL was introduced. Now, one more thing, how we write code. So this is again related to point number 4, like why NoSQL was introduced, and it can be a very good reason to put our point forward कि मेरे को NoSQL क्यों use करना है. So how we write code, right? जैसे बड़ा जगह नहीं है यार बिल्कुल. तो give me a second, let's use this space. ठीक है. So how we write code specifically, ठीक है. So what we do is, let's say you have written API, ठीक है. It will take some request, and then it will return some response. Cool. Now let's say this request, while processing, it will do some operations, ठीक है. Now it will construct this response, and it will return to this to user, this API request, this this user hit this API and then got this response. Now what we are doing is we are also storing this response in our database. ठीक है, OOP paradigm basically we are discussing. So this is a use case that we also want to store the response which we return to users. Like any could be the reason could be anything. Probably I want to monitor later, or probability I want to check later if there are any issues that user didn't got proper response, or like it is a banking application, I want to monitor everything which I am sending to the users. So you have maintained the database, and in this case what you will have to do, let's say this was SQL database, and let's say this was NoSQL database. Let's take both these scenarios. So in both the scenarios, what will happen in case it is a SQL? So in SQL, what you define is you define multiple tables according to the relations which you have established, and plus you will specify the columns. ठीक है, you will specify the columns key, column A, column B, column C. In relational database, in non-relational database, what specifically happens, you can directly dump this response. You don't have to do the conversion in between there. That's the point where NoSQL signs in. You will not have to write any conversion logic in between. That's what we have written here. You will not have to write extra translation. You will not have to maintain an extra translation layer in case of NoSQL database that you will have to do in the case of SQL databases. वहाँ पे ऐसा नहीं होगा कि आपका ऐसा डेटा ऑब्जेक्ट है, इसको डायरेक्ट उठा के डाल दिया, नहीं कर सकते. Like it could be possible that you have specified one column with a type as XML or JSON, then you can do it. But again, as we talk about database as a whole, that would not be possible, because you will specify multiple columns, or like there will be stored in the rows. So in that scenario, you will have to break that data. You have this object, right? Let's say this object only. So you will have to break this data. User ID will go to column user ID, then first name will go to column first name, all those things. So this is the one reason. Now talking about this, let's say comparing this, let's say around the querying capability we discussed. ठीक है, तो querying capability में what we discussed is, let's say this is the profile of Bill Gates. पेन चेंज करना पड़ेगा यार, रुको एक मिनट. Okay, so this is our pen. Now let's say this is the profile of Bill Gates. Now Bill Gates profile is represented by table. How many tables? 2, 3, 4, then 5, and so we have we have maintained 6 tables denoting the specific relations between them. Let's say this stores the user details, and this is the summary. Then it will specify what all the reasons, Bill Gates resided in, or like what all locations Bill Gates resided in. Then these are the industries table. ठीक है, मतलब in experiences you can mention this, and this is related to the industry ID. You will have industry ID here, and for that industry ID you will have the details about it. And then there are positions table, education table, and context info table. So all those things you have maintained 6 tables in case. Now let's say in case of LinkedIn profile, right? This is the data for LinkedIn profile. So what will happen? Let's say I want to display complete profile here. ठीक है, मैंने बोला कि मेरे को बिल गेट्स की प्रोफाइल दिखाओ. मैंने क्या बोला? तो I want to see complete profile of Bill Gates. ठीक है, तो what you will have to do, how will you query the database? In that case, you will have to gather all these details from all these tables. ठीक है, you don't have this information present at single place, and like you can do it definitely, but you will have to do multiple operations that you can avoid in case you have this data present at single document, single place. Okay, so that's where again signs are NoSQL database use case. So in case of relational database, you have to perform multiple queries or like perform complex joins. Will have to do that. Like the joins are specifically supported by SQL databases because we have that assumption that we will maintain relations, and according to the relations we will fetch the data performing the joins. Okay, inner join, left join, right join, all those things. And in case of document database, your NoSQL database, you will have all this information present and single place. So डायरेक्ट क्वेरी करो, यूजर आईडी बिल गेट्स की है, ठीक है, दिस इज योर यूजर आईडी 1234, सो यू विल गो टू डेटाबेस डायरेक्टली विद दिस यूजर आईडी एंड गेट ऑल द डिटेल्स, सारी प्रोफाइल आ गई, डिस्प्लेड, काम खत्म. ठीक है, तो these are the some things which you can look into if you think around why I should go with NoSQL database. Okay, so there are these reasons. Let's move into some other comparison factors. Okay, what are the other comparison factors when we discuss NoSQL with SQL, or NoSQL is your document model specifically. ठीक है, यहाँ पे there can be key value pair as well in NoSQL, but when we say document model, just अरे यार हाँ document, anyway this is document. ठीक है, तो when we say document model, we are talking about NoSQL databases. This we already discussed. Application code simplicity, we mentioned that in case of SQL databases you will have to maintain extra translation layer so that you can convert your object, your probably in Java your poser, right? ठीक है, so you will have to convert that, you will have to translate that into columns specifically, and then you have to dump the data to the SQL table. But in case of NoSQL, you can dump that object directly into your database. So that's kind of code simplicity you are getting when you are using NoSQL. ठीक है, so this is the table, data in application. So first is data in application, like what kind of data you like, let's say what is the use case you are solving. ठीक है, I think one thing missing in this parameters is around acid properties. So that is again a more important parameter. So let's say if you need all these transaction support, atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability. So if you need all these transaction support, then you will want to prefer SQL databases instead of NoSQL, because right now the transaction properties are also guaranteed by some NoSQL databases, but it is built specifically for these purposes. ठीक है, acid comes मतलब वो नहीं होता ऐसे घुसा हुआ है अंदर SQL databases के. तो apart from this acid specifically, what are the other comparison factors which you can think of? One is data in application, what kind of data or what kind of use case you are solving. So first one is like in case of document, what we need is we need document kind of structure. So the example which we discussed, कि in case of let's say I want to fetch complete profile for LinkedIn, ठीक है, तो it's better to dump the data into document store instead as compared to SQL data store. Poor join support, we don't need, so specifically we don't have any relations. ठीक है, तो if we don't have any relations, we don't have to perform the joins. If we have relations, then we should prefer relational database because we will need to get the data around. Requirement is many to many relationships. When we say many to many relationships, document is good for when we said document, right? So it's good for one to many relationships. ठीक है, one key हो गया आपका, and many में you have the entire document. In case of relational database, you will have many to many relationships. Now, it will not be true to say that if you have many to many relationships, you can go with SQL databases. ठीक है, there will be other factors in consideration that you will have to take. But in case of many to many relationship as well, we will discuss again in this same video that if the many to many relationships are also very much nested or very much complex, then SQL databases might not solve your use case. You will have to go to graph databases. ठीक है, जैसे हमने बोला relations है, तो let's say the Facebook मेंटेन्स द यूजर कनेक्शंस, इसका फ्रेंड ये, इसका फ्रेंड ये, उसका फ्रेंड ये, उसका फ्रेंड उतना, मतलब वो इंडिया का, वो यूएस का, ऐसे सब कुछ, ऑल दोज रिलेशनशिप्स. ठीक है, सो यू हैव द रिलेशनशिप्स, बट विल यू गो विद द SQL databases? No, because sorry, because the relationships which we are talking about here are very complex, very much nested. So SQL database में उतने complex operations आप perform नहीं कर पाओगे to get the details when you need them. So it's better in that case. We will be discussing graph database, you will get an idea. Number two is schema flexibility. Now, in case of document model, right, we mentioned that you can dump the entire document. So that what it means that you are not maintaining any schema. ठीक है, document में कुछ भी हो सकता है, anything can be present in the document. So you don't have to enforce that schema. Whatever the object you have, we said that you can dump that object into that data model in your database. So whatever object you have, you can directly dump it. There is no schema defined, and that schema you will have to maintain in your application code. So if you see, right, if we talk about abstraction, in case of SQL databases, you will have your schema defined, and which will enforce that you will write the data in that format and you will retrieve the data in your format. But in case of NoSQL databases, you will have to maintain that logic in your application code. ठीक है, आई विल हैव टू एनफोर्स दैट लॉजिक इन माई एप्लीकेशन कोड कि इस हिसाब से स्कीमा में मेरे पास डेटा आने वाला है, लाइक दिस इज द पर्टिकुलर टेबल एंड फ्रॉम दिस पर्टिकुलर टेबल द डेटा विल कम इन दिस पर्टिकुलर फॉर्मेट. ठीक है, तो आई कैन कन्वर्ट दैट इनटू माय ऑब्जेक्ट एंड देन रीड द डेटा. सो दैट लॉजिक विल कम इनटू application code. In case of SQL databases, that schema is defined at a SQL database itself only. Now we already discussed that schema on read. Schema on read is that whenever we read the data, we will convert that into object. Here we have already specified the schema in the database when the table we created. So schema is already defined when you write the data. In case of NoSQL, that's not true. Adding new fields is easy task. In case of NoSQL, since we are not maintaining any schema, it's easier, very easy to add new columns. But if you talk about SQL databases, it's very painful task if your data size is very huge. Now you will have to introduce some kind of mechanisms inside your SQL databases. Now it's not right that SQL databases are not used at scale. They are. There are like lot of use cases where you will see that SQL databases are used at very much scale, like huge kind of scale. Now if we talk about this specific point, right, it says that in case of migration, let's say you are adding a new column, so it could be a pain point, and it will be because you will have to specify that schema in the table and then you will dump the data, or probably you have to migrate from table 1 to 2, that because you have modified the schema. Okay, so what you will have to do, you have to plan that kind of migration, and there can be downtime associated to as well. So you will have to introduce some kind of mechanisms. ठीक है, you will have to introduce some kind of mechanism so that data का जो है, मतलब it should not impact our live application. समझ रहे हो बात? Another point is data locality for queries. Now it is again related to the point we discussed earlier. जैसे I want to gather all the details of Bill Gates. ठीक है, तो if the data is present at this place, I can go directly here and then fetch the data. Let's say this data is placed, the chunk of data is placed at 6 places. Now I have to go each and every place and then gather the data. So there can be performance issues if we talk specifically about read. ठीक है, because we are gathering data from here 6 tables, और यहाँ पे हम डायरेक्ट गए एक की लेके गए कि ये बिल गेट्स की क्वेरी है, इसका सारा डेटा हमें दे दो. ठीक है, so these are the kind of scenarios where NoSQL shines. Also Oracle has the feature to avoid this. It is also available in, I think there is one database provided by Google, I don't remember the name, but there are solutions. Okay, there could be some bottlenecks in creating certain kind of database, so there is some solutions in place as well. That's what we have specified in the similarity, that there can always be a feature similarity between SQL and NoSQL. It totally depends on use case we are trying to solve, and it totally depends on the database we are choosing. Okay, let's say if we talk about AWS document DB, right, it supports all the general SQL queries as well. Okay, you can write queries in that same format as well. Okay, and it will have good support for joins. Now similarly, SQL database can also store data in document form. That we already talked about, that you can specify the column with the type document, and then you can dump the data there. You will have to maintain the logic in your application code that this is the format of data I am storing and this is how I will read. the schema on read part. ठीक है. Now moving on to query languages for data. Now moving on to query languages for data. So one is SQL. For relational database you will have SQL query. If you talk about, let's say, one NoSQL database, let's say DynamoDB, so you will have AWS CLI to create the table, then to read the table and all those things. ठीक है. So any database you choose, it will have specific commands associated to it, how you can gather data from it, how you can write data to it, how can extract data from it, how can you create table, create anything. ठीक है, all those operations. So specifically talking about SQL, it's a declarative query language. Now what we mean by declarative query language, so there can be two types. One is declarative, another could be imperative. Let's focus on कि इन दोनों में difference क्या है difference दोनों में, बताओ भाई. तो let's take one example. ठीक है, I have written one code for I equal to 0, I less than n, I plus plus. Then we have another loop for j equal to 0, j less than m, j plus plus. And here you have increased your count plus equal to 1, and you are returning count. ठीक है, you have initialized here int count. ठीक है, you in the function you are given n and m. ठीक है, ऐसे मत बोलना, ही कोड गलत है, कुछ भी लिख दिया. ठीक है, तो ऊपर फंक्शन लिखा हुआ है, मस्त चलेगा ये कोड. ठीक है, इसमें पैरामीटर्स आ रहे हैं, n m पैरामीटर आ रहे हैं, इसको हमें काउंट रिटर्न करना है. ठीक है, सो इफ वी टॉक अबाउट स्पेसिफिक फंक्शन, राइट, लेट्स से आई एम एग्जीक्यूटिंग दिस कोड इन CPP. ठीक है, C++ में मैं कोड एग्जीक्यूट कर रहा हूँ. नाउ हियर हाउ विल दिस कोड एग्जीक्यूट? ठीक है, if you want to debug this code, how will it execute? It will start from here. ठीक है, you have initialized int count equal to 0, then it will go to I equal to 0, then it will go to inner loop where j equal to 0, it will increment the count equal to 1. ठीक है, count equal to 1 हो गया, then it will increment j equal to 1, count 2 हो गया, increment count j equal to 3, count 3 हो गया. ठीक है, all those things. This is how you will count. Once the m is over, let's say m was 3, after 3 operations you will go again to I equal to 1. ठीक है, again you will increase I, you will again start from j equal to 0. So you are getting the flow. ठीक है, you will go step by step. When you start from top line, you will go step by step, and then you will perform the operation, like execute the code logic. This is how imperative language works. ठीक है, the example which we example we took is the C++. ठीक है, tells computer to perform certain operations in certain order. ठीक है, we written the code. We specified in which order this code should be executed. This is the code, this is the order in which the code should be executed, and the code is executed that way. In case of declarative language, what happens is you don't specify the order. Okay, you will only specify that I need count. Okay, I need count from this place, and my n equal to 3, m equal to 5. ठीक है, this I will specify. Now it totally depends on the computer how I am computing that. समझे बात? We will not specify how this execution works in the backend. We will only specify that this is the result I need. I need the count. अब तुम्हें कैसे लेके आना है वो तुम्हारी मर्जी. ठीक है, मेरे को काउंट चाहिए, लाके दो मेरे को. So this is how declarative works. You only specify the pattern of data you need. In case of SQL query, let's say you return select star from user table. So what you specified that I need all the data from user table. Now in whichever format the data is stored, I just need the entire data. I don't want to know how it's actually executing in the backend. ठीक है, so that order, or that like how it's performing, what's the execution logic, what's the code that is being written inside, what's the optimizer doing, what's the indexer doing, all those things I don't want to worry about. I just need the data. So you only specify the pattern of data you need, but you don't have to specify how these results are achieved. हमें वो कोड नहीं लिखना. ठीक है, हमें एक्चुअली उस टेबल में जाके इटरेट नहीं करना इस यूजर टेबल में कि मेरे को ऐसे डेटा निकालना है. आई डोंट हैव टू डू दैट. This is how declarative language works. Database systems query optimizer can decide how to gather this data. So this is one example. Let's say this specific loop, right? Now in this case, when I written the logic, I specified this is the order it will be executed. Right now we haven't left any scope of parallel execution. Like ठीक है, अगर हम parallel execution करना चाहते हैं, then we will have to modify this code. ठीक है, बट इन केस ऑफ SQL database it can take that call, ठीक है, whatever could be the parameters, but it can take the call कि मेरे को पैरेलल में एग्जीक्यूशन में करना है, मेरे को इस तरीके से एग्जीक्यूशन करना है ताकि I can retrieve the results as fast as possible. That's the task of optimizer कि मेरे को किस तरीके से results retrieve करने हैं ताकि the results could be faster and faster. I'm able to solve the user queries as fast as possible. समझे बात? What is declarative and what is imperative? Now moving to another querying capability, that is MapReduce. It's generally used in NoSQL databases. तो we will be discussing this more in chapter 10. ठीक है, chapter 10 में अभी थोड़ा टाइम है, this is chapter 2. ठीक है, तो where this is used, if we want to take the general idea, where this is used for processing large amount of data. So if we talk about map is basically collecting the data, and reduce is basically injecting the data. ठीक है, let's take this example. मतलब map मतलब तुम आप मैपिंग कर रहे हो, reduce मतलब उसको वापस कंबाइन कर दे रहे हो फिर, ठीक है. So let's say this is your input, you have dog, cat, dog, mouse, dog, cat, this is your input. ठीक है, now what you want is, you want that जैसे जो भी यहाँ पे यूनिक एनिमल्स हैं, ठीक है, I have I think 3 unique animals here, so I need the count of those animals. Cool. So how it will work if I specify the job, how it will work, this is the logic. ठीक है, अरे यार बैक होता है क्या? अरे होता है, नाइस. तो तो you splitted them. यहाँ पे you let's say these are the 3 rows you have, you splitted them, then you mapped them, what is the count, then you shuffled. ठीक है, जैसे डॉग यहाँ से एक आया, यहाँ से एक आया, यहाँ से एक आया, यहाँ से एक आया, ठीक है. कैट यू got one from here, one from here, then mouse you got one from here, ठीक है. This is called shuffling, and then you actually reduce what's the count. So this is how it works. This is a simple example, we will be discussing more in details in chapter 10. So let's wait. सब्सक्राइब करो चैनल को, ठीक है, वेट करते रहो, जल्दी आएगा, ज़्यादा वेट नहीं करवाएंगे हम, समझ रहे हो. Moving to another database model, we already discussed document model, we already discussed SQL relational data model. Let's discuss graph data model. तो graph data model में we discussed that, what we discussed, that like when we will use SQL database, ठीक है, we discussed that in case there are many to many relationships, we prefer to use relational database model, and if there are one to many relationships, then we will prefer to use NoSQL. ठीक है, NoSQL, let's say the document data model. But if there are many to many relationships that are too complex, the example which we took of Facebook, so in that case your SQL database will not be scalable to handle those. In that case you should move towards network database. ठीक है, so this is what we have written here, that many to many relationships can be very well handled by RDBMS, but what if these relationships become very complex and nested, इसके अंदर ये, इसके अंदर ये, इसके अंदर ये, ठीक है, all those very much complex, बहुत ज़्यादा ऐसे, बहुत ज़्यादा. So in that scenarios your graph data model will be more suitable to solve your use case. This is just one example, like how complex it could get. Let's say user 1 is connected to user 2, then user 2 is connected to user 3, probably user 2 is connected to user 4 as well, then user 4 is connected to user 1. So there are kind of interlinked. We don't know the specific like there are relations, but very complex relations. Now a graph provides flexibility in data modeling as compared to RDBMS. This one such database is Neo4j, and use query language is Cypher, and it is also declarative. फायदा हो गया. We don't have to specify what we have to write in the backend, or like how actually the execution will look like. So we don't have to write that code. We just have to specify the pattern in which data we need, and it will perform the operations जैसे इसकी मर्जी, हमें बस रिजल्ट्स चाहिए. ठीक है, तो दिस इज वन एग्जांपल दैट यू हैव द डेटाबेस मेंटेन्ड of the people living in different places. So what you need is, you need all the people who immigrated from US to Europe. पहले US में रहता था, फिर यूरोप चला गया. So all those peoples I need the details. ठीक है, so this is the query which we return. We specified the pattern. ठीक है, declarative के फायदे. We specified the pattern that born in equals US and living in equals Europe. Cool. Now When we can start from there can be two ways, ठीक है, there can be two ways, one way two way. पहली वे कौन सी? What you can do, you start from each and every people. जैसे मैंने पहले मनदीप से स्टार्ट किया. I will keep on traversing the graph unless I find location equal to US. ठीक है. So in this case you will have to iterate over all the people. मनदीप के साथ iterate किया, फिर user 2 के साथ iterate किया, फिर user 3 के साथ. Let's say I have 100 users. So what I will do, I will iterate over all these 100 users and check if the location is US for them. If the sorry, if the खाना खाया हुआ यार, if the location is US for people, then we will retrieve that on return those in the results. ठीक है. Now another way could be that I start from the location equal to US. ठीक है. I start from location equal to US. So I started from this and I will then move backwards. ठीक है. So in here your born in should be like your born in location should be US and your live in location should be Europe. ठीक है. So in this scenario there is a possibility that you will reduce the number of operations because you are trying backwards. यहाँ पे we are sure that अगर इससे जो भी outward जा रहे हैं, ठीक है, they will, if they are conversing on some specific person, then that person will be the answer which you can return in the results. समझे बात? Now लाइट चली गई. Anyway, we will continue. A graph database is compared to network model. So network model, if you are specifically preparing for interviews, you can probably skip this, but let's quickly discuss what are the differences around network model and graph model. So in network model, schema specifies record type could be nested within each record type. So all the schema which you defined, okay, it could be nested within each record type. But in case of graph, you don't have such contract. Okay, you can associate any data with any vertex. So that's the flexibility you get. To reach any particular record, you will have to specify the access path. Okay, so you will have to specify the access path. Key, this is the path I have to take. But in case of graph, again, you again have that flexibility. You can directly go to any vertex and like let's say the vertex is specified by unique identifier, unique UUID मैंने assign कर रखी है each and every vertex को. So in that case, I can go directly to that vertex and retrieve the data, and I can traverse from that vertex to any of the edges. Children of record are ordered set. In case of network model, they are ordered, so you will have to worry about specific ordering that you have to maintain. But in case of graph, again, you will have that flexibility. There is no such order which you have to worry about. In case of network model, there will be imperative queries. Too much work, नहीं करना हमें use. ठीक है. In graph model, so you have support for both declarative and imperative. Unless you have a specific use case for imperative, go for declarative. So this is all about what we discussed today around what's the data models and what are the query languages specifically. We will come back with our third chapter. Till then, stay safe. Tata. Bye bye.